Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Eric Paxton, and I'm the Director of Partnerships and Operations here at Risk-Based Security. Appreciate you taking the time out to be with us today, as we realize that many of you are facing disruptions and challenges to your business. And one of those challenges is cybersecurity. So I hope that we can offer some useful information today that will help you in that area. As you're aware, the ongoing coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on the US economy, with a sharp rise in unemployment and economists predicting a continued market decline and recession. Over the next 30 to 45 minutes, we will be exploring the impact on cybersecurity, correlation between recession and cybercrime, and what you need to know to better secure your organization during these unprecedented times. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our presenter for today, but first let's run through some quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is part of the RVATECH Tech It Yourself series. You can find out more about that on their website at www.rvatechonline.com. And we'd like to hear from you. Post your questions in the chat box provided in the Zoom meeting. We'll leave some time for Q&A at the end, and we'll address as many questions as we can at that point. If you have more questions, or we can help your organization with security resources, breach data, or vulnerability intelligence, get in touch with RBS via the contact page on our website. So as I said, my name is Eric Paxton, and I'm the Director of Partnerships and Operations here at RBS. But it's time to introduce you to our main presenter for this webinar. Today's session will be led by Jake Kouns, who is the CEO and CISO for Risk-Based Security, providing cybersecurity resources, vulnerability intelligence, and breach data. He previously oversaw the operations of the open-sourced vulnerability database, osvdb.org, and DataLossDB. Jake has presented at many well-known security conferences, including RSA, Black Hat, DEF CON, FIRST, and InfoSec World. He is the co-author of a number of books, including Information Technology Risk Management in Enterprise Environments, and the Chief Information Security Officer. Jake has briefed the DHS and Pentagon on cyber liability insurance issues, and is frequently interviewed as an expert in the security industry by publications like Information Week, eWeek, Forbes, PC World, CSO, and CIO Magazine. He has appeared on CNN, as well as the Brian Lehrer Show, and was featured on the cover of Security Magazine. It's a pleasure to introduce you to Jake, who's going to take you through today's agenda.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? I'm excited to be here today. As Eric mentioned, it is a very unusual time, and even for me, an unusual topic to present about. We know there's a lot of people going through some really hard times right now. So this topic is one that we don't take lightly, but something that we want to share with folks and hopefully open some dialogue as how we, together as a Richmond community, address and move forward. Okay. So with that, let's talk a little bit about sort of global pandemics and impact on humans. From my standpoint, we've all heard, prior to COVID, we all heard of a pandemic, pretty much understood the concept. For the most part, though, many of us, I will say, haven't lived through one in terms of been impacted, such as this. In 2009, 2010, H1N1 was something that people were aware of. I know that when I was doing some international travel to London at the time, was aware of the swine flu. And when you think about sort of death tolls for all of these sorts of events, some of them much more significant than others, but the H1N1 death toll, wide range of estimates between 150,000 and 575,000 died due to the swine flu. And so, it's really hard these days to understand what the heck is going on, what to believe, what news is real, what news is fake. I sort of feel like all of it's fake news these days. But why is this pandemic different? Why is this COVID situation different and impacting all of us in a way we just haven't seen like this? And it's for a couple of reasons. The models and the initial thoughts coming out around the predictions of impact and and that 81% of the US, or half the world's population, would be impacted, and the death rates being so high, comes across as extreme. And we don't really know how this will end. The numbers have been predicted all over the place. We have some people saying that we need to reopen, and then things have been overblown. It's really, really tricky. But outside of understanding, what this virus is going to do, we haven't seen an event like this that has led to a lockdown that has impacted us and our businesses like this ever before. Over 20 million people right now filing for unemployment in the US right now, and growing. And if we compare that to the last recession, the 2008, 2009, it was about 2.6 million, right? So it is really hitting things hard. And predictions say that unemployment may actually hit 30%. So, massive impact on friends, family, and our businesses. And even just from a normal standpoint, it's great that these events are happening virtually, as most security practitioners are used to go into conferences for the year, and every conference has been canceled. And yes, DEF CON has been canceled, and it's for real this time. So just, the impact to humans and what's going on right now is really hard for us to, get our heads wrapped around. And, at the end of the day, the impact on not just organizations, but on security is substantial as well. And it's a kind of a dark reminder of the things that are going on. But when the pandemic happened and we started to see all these impacted businesses, this is when we start seeing the world and the U.S. economy moving more towards economic recession and maybe even depression. And again, debatable in who you ask, but obviously a massive impact to our economy. And we saw all kinds of crazy things, like consumers panic buying toilet paper and water, and even organizations laying off people that you wouldn't expect. Big companies that you would think would be able to weather a small storm like this, heavily funded VC-backed companies laying off, and laying off IT as well as some security folks. So what's interesting is when you look, the last time we saw a recession, and we did a whole bunch of research on this, there's a lot of references and links on our website if you want to go read further. But when we did our research, we found that the last 2008-2009 recession, fraud on the internet spiked considerably. And we expect nothing different here. And again, if we look at that 2009, right around the recession time, 73,000 complaints, or right before the recession, about 73,000 fraud complaints were sent there. 40,000 were sent in that first quarter of that 2009. So just so much of a spike compared, that Q1 just compared to that prior year. And then KPMG did a really big study where they found that many enterprises believe that the recession put their business at greater risk from out-of-work IT workers that were tempted to find new employment in the criminal underground. So we've sort of joked that hell hath no fury like an IT worker that is potentially scorned or unhappy, or perhaps just looking to figure out a way to make ends meet. Now, one thing that I can tell you that is recession-proof is crime. Cybercrime is recession-proof, and these bad actors just don't pause. As early as January, before we saw substantial lockdowns, the coronavirus phishing scams had already started. There were a few articles. Bleeping Computer actually reached out to two ransomware gangs, asking if they would take it easy on the healthcare industry. And a couple of them did reply and say, yeah, they would take it easy, but they did stipulate that any pharmaceutical company was still fair game, right? So this is where you get into sort of motives and who thinks who's a fair target or not. But even some of these groups that said they would take it easy, and sort of acknowledgement that this is a bad time for folks, and going after healthcare, probably isn't the right thing. We did see the Maze ransomware extort a vaccine testing facility. We saw an attack on a hospital. We saw an attack on a public health district that was distributing information about COVID and things that are research. So we're still seeing that even with the best intentions, that groups are still attacking organizations that really are focused on this. So, from my standpoint, I don't know how it is for everyone on the call. It sort of feels like this meme is accurate, right? Like every morning you wake up and you're just sort of trying to understand what the heck is going on and what's the damage report. And I will say that, again, it's a pretty serious event, and trying not to make light of things, but trying to bring a little normalcy back. The meme games that have been produced have been on point, and there's some really funny stuff that at least tries to get you laughing a little bit here, right? So, but when we talk about the financial impacts, however you want to debate whether the market's down or up, the economy's taking a hit, and we're not sure what's going on. And as we continue to stay locked down, there's more and more impact. And so, from our standpoint, when you look at staffing, right? When you think of the security world, if folks feel that IT positions, investment into new IT things, not sort of keep the lights running, but investment into new technology and or securing things, layoffs and the reduce of staff is a problem. In our data breach tracking world, we've seen 700 organizations face lawsuits after a data breach. We do think that number is underreported, but it makes us sort of wonder, with the lack of focus maybe on security now, when we move past some of this pandemic thing, are we going to see issues that arise of negligence for lack of focus on security and those sorts of things. Again, work from home, putting pressure on networks and internet. And if you didn't like your home internet provider before this, I'm sure you're not real pleased with it now. But again, on the slide here, we have OneWeb filing for bankruptcy. And this was a heavily funded organization that investors now are sort of looking at certain things, and instead of, hey, we're going to keep investing and losing money with some of these companies, sort of pulling the plug. And whether it's large or in Richmond, we're seeing organizations and folks saying, hey, we're closing down and we're not going to come back whatsoever. And there's more of this, unfortunately, that's going to come. When we think about regulatory change, we've seen a big increase in focus on security and regulations, trying to protect data and those sorts of things. But right now, we're sort of seeing the opposite on the regulatory side. We know that convenience has sort of always been an enemy of security for a long time. And with the pandemic, we're seeing things, for example, on March 15th, the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services declared a limited waiver on some of the provisions of the HIPAA privacy rule. And in some ways, when we need to triage and handle increased patient load, it makes sense. So in some ways, you can say that does make sense, especially when you're speaking with family and friends and trying to care for people, right? That's the more important thing. But the other thing is, if regulatory laws such as this can just be put on pause, when are they going to be reactivated? And when they're reactivated, do they have the same teeth? Or are we just going to say, it's really easy for us to say, we don't really care about this right now. Same sort of thing talking about before on potential negligence if you don't have enough staff working now. Are there any sort of potential retroactive punishment, right? A hospital that misinterpreted the new guidelines and didn't disclose a data breach or some sort of event that's happening. We are a little concerned and wondering if some of the improvements that we've seen in security are going to lose their teeth when they come back in. And so, it is this continued balance of privacy, right? Even in the healthcare space. I mean, everyone really wants this pandemic to go away quickly. We want to get everyone back to work. We want to get back to sort of our normal lives. And so, we're a data company, and I think most folks in the IT space can understand the use of big data is a good thing if you understand it. And so we're seeing technology type things coming out that potentially help. For example, South Korea started implementing surveillance cameras, smartphone location data, credit card purchases, to trace movements. Italy was using mobile phones to trace movements to see who was obeying the lockdowns. Israel, same sort of thing, using mobile phones. And even some interesting bits in San Francisco, a couple thousand emergency medical workers were wearing rings that tracking temperature and trying to understand, the early onset of COVID and these sorts of things. And it starts to really make you wonder, in many cases, if this data and this approach will help us get back to normal. It could, and maybe it does make a lot of sense, but what does that mean for us moving forward? And what if some of this information is shared inappropriately? Now, I think, for many of us, right, it feels like, I don't even know what day it is. It's this day, someday, tomorrow, another day. And many people are feeling that, hey, look, look at that again. It's another quarantine day. And this is where we started understanding, and many of us for the first time heard the concept of social distancing, right? Again, a tool to help flatten and hopefully limit some of the impact of this pandemic. Now, this picture up here, a company called Unicast started collecting geodata, or they had geodata, and then they launched what they called a social distancing scoreboard that was grading residents. Were they changing the behavior, that when government officials were urging the lockdowns, and determine if they were staying at home. And it was sort of interesting. They concluded that Washington, D.C. got an A, but Wyoming on a whole earned an F. And ultimately, why you can look at this and say, well, this is a pretty cool chart, and this is pretty neat. Visual looks neat. Is this cool and helpful, or is this really concerning, right? Is it alarming? Does it actually help us? And we've now seen further, this concept of apps on your phone for contact tracing, right? And many folks are believing this is a vital tool to understand if you've been impacted with this or come in contact with anyone. So, one side of the mouth, this is some pretty neat things that can hopefully help us through this. On the other side, it's some pretty concerning, potentially privacy and things being introduced. And a lot of times when things like this are introduced, they're not really pulled back into a meaningful area. So we all learned this concept of social distancing, and then introverts of the world are kind of like, this is great, I'm really good at this social distancing thing, right? But then there's a fair bit of other people out there that, they're not introverts and they're struggling, and while they're trying to, have a good face on and say everyone's holding up fine, but they're really not, and they're really wanting to get back to interacting with friends and families and coworkers and all these sorts of things, right? So what's interesting is what we see is that Zoom, right? And we're actually on a Zoom call, and prior to the COVID-19. I think if you would have asked folks outside of the tech industry, they might not know what the heck Zoom was, right? And it seems that Zoom becomes this overnight sensation for millions and millions of people, and even gets to the point where, sort of it becomes like a verb, right? Do you want to Zoom? Like kind of like do you Google it kind of a thing. And again, I believe that the pandemic and trying to stay in touch with friends and family is the reason that so many people know Zoom, and it launches to this massive popularity. And we've been seeing Zoom being used not just for sort of chatting with friends and things like that, but for conducting school classes and after hour activities and weddings and all sorts of things that if you think about it, there's a lot of events and life events that have been on pause, and people are trying to figure out ways to continue to move forward. Now, unfortunately, the Zoom sort of success story didn't last very long without a bunch of controversy, and there always is in the security space, right? And as attention grew, a number of issues were uncovered, right? Specifically around privacy settings, vulnerabilities in the platform. And we've seen this in our research, right? When there is a current event, security folks target that, whether it be phishing scams or whatnot. But if there's a certain type of thing that's popular, right? From now, anything that's work from home or video conferencing is getting a lot of attention from researchers, right? If there's a bug bounty or monetary incentive, you'll definitely see people focus on it. Or if it's some sort of hot topic, you'll see things start to focus in that regard. And so these issues with Zoom come out, and maybe some of you weren't even sure if you should join this Zoom call, right? Because you hear sort of the world is ending and Zoom is horrible. And the reality is, in many cases, it's hard to know. And if you ask 10 different security folks what they think about Zoom, you probably get 10 different answers. From our standpoint, the two real big things that were coming out, let's call it three, we were seeing the concept of Zoom bombing, right? This is where people are joining Zoom calls and causing problems for the most part because configurations of Zoom were making it open, but people were also doing screenshots with the meeting ID right in there so people could jump in, things like that. And Zoom has already taken some steps to try to fix some of that. But the other things we were seeing were vulnerabilities in the Zoom client, and then of course some of the privacy issues that pretty much all of the video conference folks have. So when this happens, like it is in the most times for security, we see a lot of companies immediately react and take advantage and say, hey, look, we need to shut this thing down. We're not really sure what's going on, but you can ban it. And so I guess the question is, should you be worried? From our standpoint, we've seen that, look, the vulnerabilities that have come out so far within Zoom have been what we call LPE, local privilege escalation. So that means that for the most part, you need to be on the machine to escalate. So if you already have sort of root or admin to the box, and then you can do something further, that attack vector really isn't that big of a deal, right? So this is where, threat modeling attack vectors really come into play, thinking about how you're using it and what it is. But there really is evidence that Zoom's client, their code maturity is quite low. And so the fact that there may be some other things lingering, it's potentially the case, but attack modeling. So at the end of the day, though, when it comes down to it, right now, Zoom is just so popular, and for the most part, because people can do fun things like come from a different couch, or maybe a playhouse that from your childhood or somewhere else, or for me, maybe it's the Continental, and again, I think at the end of the day, we're going to see focus on Zoom and these web clients, because anytime there are these issues like I discussed, we see researchers sort of take out a hit on these things and go down that path. All right, so working from home. I always sort of laugh at working from home. When we started at Risk-Based Security, we were all working from home. It was only last year did we open an office in Scott's Addition, and sort of everyone sort of talks about how working from home is the best thing ever. Done it for a long time. I think there's pros and cons of getting people together, and also the flexibility of working from home. And there's ups and downs of it, and having kids home and all those sorts of things is making it tough for a lot of folks. A lot of the virtual meeting technologies, not just Zoom, but WebEx and Google Hangouts and all that, they are a privacy nightmare, right? We've aggregated a lot of articles here. You can see a lot of them on our website if you want to look deeper, but WebEx shares registration, host, and usage information with service providers. Google Hangout analyzes pretty much everything like Google does. Even, Slack, right? A huge spike in all these sort of technology for people to try to collaborate during these times. But again, you can't delete messages when you use the free version. And Zoom continues to make the news right now because they share so much information and their encryption hasn't been great. But they have really engaged with the security community, hired a bunch of folks, working on increasing their bug bounties, trying to do the things to hopefully build confidence back. So, working from home is tricky and it is different, and people need to understand that there are concerns, but it can be managed if you pay attention to it. So what can we do from working from home? Corporate hygiene. Look, you got to look at your policies a little bit differently. Some of your tools that have worked well when you've had remote workers that are at home for a little bit, but then they always come back to the office to check in with the mothership to get patches or policies rolled out or whatever it is. You got to really look into, is this stuff happening? I think there's quite a few companies now that are just thinking things are happening, but they're not, because it's always sort of worked, but they're not verifying now the differences. Again, the phishing attacks we're seeing on the rise. So many people are so wondering what their companies are going to do about next steps to reopen. We've been hearing about Virginia governor saying, hey, May 15th, we're going to soft open. So any sort of message that goes out with some sort of crafted, you want to know about this, is really getting people eager to click. It's hard not to click as it is. And with, the fear and what's going on, it's tough. I think the other thing too is people will forget that collaboration of fixing things, working with developers or platform folks, or talking to them about it. We're seeing that people are trying to collaborate, but maybe the efficiency isn't there as much. I saw something the other day where they were talking about what drove you to the cloud, or what drove that new technology that you were thinking about doing. And there were a bunch of answers, and at the end it was COVID-19. And while it's sort of in humor, in some ways this is a prime opportunity. So if you haven't had a chance to force some of your users or transition some of your users to multi-factor, two-factor authentication, now's probably the time, right? Making sure you understand your assets, understanding how to prioritize things. All these sorts of things are really important. And we sort of joked for a long time, the BYOD, bring your own device. Maybe it's LYOD, right? Leave your own device, where we're seeing much more devices that aren't coming back in, aren't checking in on the network to get things that they would expect. Now, this pandemic has led us to sort of appreciate and maybe in some ways curse the ability to shop online rather than going to brick and mortar. But again, as more things are going online, the cybersecurity needs become even greater, right? So more challenges for e-commerce companies to deal with this, more challenges for the customers, increased traffic and demand. Not to mention we're seeing struggles with warehouse staffing and delivery crew in terms of fulfilling, but keeping them safe during these times as well. We don't even have time to talk about the fraud and the price gouging type stuff that we've seen. But again, as we're talking about security and thinking about that, the more online activity, again, the more important that security is. And as we've continued to aggregate and look at vulnerability, this just gives us, up until 2019, but we weren't seeing a slowdown in terms of the number of vulnerabilities before this pandemic. And we're just getting ready to release our Q1 results. And again, we're not seeing that all of a sudden magically vulnerabilities have stopped being disclosed in products. We've aggregated to this point over 227,000 vulnerability all time. And things are just not slowing down. Now, from our standpoint, what's really been interesting is the concept of Patch Tuesday and what this has become. 2020 is an interesting year for sure, but it has really introduced something that I want to share with here in a second. But if we think about Patch Tuesday, right? Microsoft introduced this in 2003, and it was sort of to have a reliable day that you could forecast when Microsoft patches would come out. And at first, people sort of weren't real thrilled about this because, right, as soon as a vuln comes out and you fix it, you should let us know. But organizations sort of fell in love with this because it gave ability to forecast staffing and staff for this and understand when it's coming and what the workload looks like. But at some point, we started to see more folks, right, like Adobe and other vendors saying, well, hey, this is working for Microsoft. Why don't we just also release on Patch Tuesday? And, you know, if you look at the stats here, sort of, you can just sort of see, you know, what Patch Tuesday in terms of volume has been really doing. But for 2020, we have a new thing that we've been dealing with. We've dealt with it twice already, and there's one more storm coming in July. And when two hurricanes collide, there's this phenomenon that they call the Fujiwara effect. And so in 2020, we have dubbed it the year of the vulnerability Fujiwara. And that's because we have Microsoft Patch Tuesday and Oracle quarterly CPUs colliding on several days. In fact, 3 times. So we have these 2 really substantial storms of Oracle releases a lot every quarter for everyone that has to deal with Oracle that understands it. And then, of course, Microsoft at the same time. So we dealt with one in January, we dealt with one in April, and one in July is coming up again. And it really is a perfect storm where, for the most part, Microsoft, Oracle, Adobe, SAP, Siemens, Schneider Electric, and then depending on some of the others, you may see Google, Apple, Mozilla, Intel, Cisco, F5, Juniper, and a bunch more, IBM, McAfee, Lenovo, VMware, you really don't know. In that April storm, we saw a ton. We actually saw 600 new vulnerabilities released in a single day. And so from our standpoint, that is a ton of vulnerabilities to drop on an organization when they're not impacted with inefficiencies or lack of staffing in a pandemic time. And where news cycles may spaz people out about Zoom being a huge issue, we can sure tell you from what we saw and what we aggregated, there's a lot more critical issues out there than trying to waste effort on talking to executives about Zoom and is that a problem and should we ban it and those sorts of things. If you're vuln nerds like us, our 2019 year-end report, we can send it to you. You can contact me directly, happy to send it to you. And again, that Q1 report's coming out, happy to send it to you, happy for you to see all the details. Super proud of my team. They do some really amazing deep dives in there to give you some more understanding of what's going on. Now, one of the things that we also look at too, we do a lot of the vendor risk ratings and looking at supply chain and all those sorts of stuff. And I think for everyone that couldn't find toilet paper for a while, and hopefully you all have it now and you're good, we saw supply chain risks, right? We saw the panic of buying, and again, whether people were focused on toilet paper or rice or hand sanitizer or whatever it is, you know, we do need to think about the security side of this. What is it going to look like with our vendors if they have problems? Not just for us that maybe have staffing issues, but what about our vendors that do? Are some of the vendors or the software that we rely on able to maintain? We've seen some really interesting things, like Google announced that they're going to do a freeze on Chrome and Chromium, and sort of, yeah, they will intend to put out security patches, but they're going to try to do feature freezes, not to introduce more problems. We've seen this with other folks. So it's a prime time that's putting pressure on the vendors that we rely on, and in many cases, the libraries and open source projects and things like that major pieces of software in our organizations rely on. And you just have to start thinking about those risks associated with what you're dealing with. For those that have been going for DEF CON for a long time, they may remember that DEF CON 6, the back of the slogan was "I miss crime" on the shirt, and it was sort of in jest at the time of so many security folks selling out, right, and moving more into security services and things like that. But when you really think about whether it's supply chain risk or e-commerce, whatever, we started to do some thinking around what does this do for physical crime, right? And we've seen that over 700 uniform officers in New York, and I think the number's been growing, tested positive. 5,000 police department employees were out sick. And you know, some estimates say that was 9 to 10% of the workforce was out. Same sorts of things in New Jersey and whatnot, that just, you know, police enforcement not being at full capacity. So with a reduction in sort of police force, shelter in place, are we going to see people not reporting as much crime, or is it a really good time to be commercial burglary or burglar going after commercial things? So we got to make sure that physical security is still important. In that 2009 economic downturn, there was a 45% increase in certain types of crimes. So it was an uptick in burglaries and thefts and those sorts of things. You know, this is sad but true, right? You know, with the social distancing, I said, throw me your wallet, right? Things are changing a bit. So some further research that we've done sort of suggested that with so many people staying home, less break-ins and things in the residential area, but commercial crimes and offices that, you know, people haven't been at for a long time or don't have cameras or don't have security systems. Those crimes and that focus is on the rise. So awareness, it's always something we talk about, right? That we need to make sure awareness is there about the issues, and it probably is more important now than ever. You know, our attention is very spread thin. And so if you think about it for security folks or IT folks, you got to think about it for other, or say our users. And when your attention is spread thin, some things that you know better that you should do, you probably don't do, right? So maybe we're not as familiar with some of the security policies that we're thinking about because we're distracted. Or maybe, you know, in this new work from home world, it's a little more challenging to perform those duties. And these opportunist attacks, you know, we're seeing that they're increasing. And so we just got to make sure that we're keeping up with the things that we used to do, but doing our best to ensure that we're communicating to folks about what's happening. I know we've helped a few organizations with just some phishing tests and things like that. And the again, if you're willing to go down the COVID path to test people, people are really concerned, and they're not doing the things that I think normally that we've trained them to do. So we need to be careful about that. So prioritizing risk, we've been on, if for anyone that's heard us before, we've been on about this for a very long time, that you need to have intelligence of what's going on out there in terms of your vendors and vulnerabilities. You need to understand your assets and your intelligence. And from there, that's when you can prioritize. And from there, that's when you can actually remediate. And from our standpoint, this is sort of the same, but more important, right? And if you're an organization that has been impacted and you're not spending or hiring or you're decreasing, you got to have that game plan of fixing the right things, not just security, the right security. And I wish there was a specific, you know, playbook for every single company out there, but there isn't, and you really need to understand what those risks are to you. So again, we don't always say that whether it's one particular vulnerability that comes out, it may be very different depending on your assets and the criticality of them. So you really need to focus on understanding your assets and then where to move forward. Same sort of thing, bad intelligence, whether it's security or threat intelligence. We're seeing all kinds of stuff coming out, articles and things that it makes it really hard to sometimes understand what you should be focused on, what you should be prioritizing. So, you know, make sure you understand what you're reading, make sure you're understanding what you're using. And I can't say it many times, with limited resources, you can't afford to miss the mark. You've got to make sure that you're really focused on the stuff that matters to your organization. So staying on the path, bad actors aren't slowing down, right? They're going strong. And there's enough evidence that this isn't going to stop, whether it was from the last recession or what's happening now. We've seen security teams trying to band together, trying to figure out how to stop some of these bad actors and documenting threat actor campaigns and stuff like this. But it's really tough right now to hit pause on any security efforts. But I would say this is a great time that if you have products that are not fully implemented or things that you have not fully configured, you should really focus on those, right? So if you have a point where your management is saying, hey, we're going to pause spending because we're not sure what's going on, I'm sure that every IT and security team out there has work that can be done, right? products that have been put in place, but you've always thinking about doing those next things. So there's a lot that you can do to continue to move things forward, to continue to improve. But we need to keep our eyes open. We need to understand and what's going on out there and adjust as things move forward. Now, we just yesterday, I believe, or 2 days ago, put out our Q1 data breach report. And what's interesting is that we saw a decrease in the number of breaches reported by, looking same quarter year over year, quite a bit of decrease, but the number of records skyrocketed, right? So again, we're not really seeing an impact slow down, but right now we are seeing a frequency maybe slow down, and maybe that's due to some of the things where they aren't getting reported or they're not coming to light because so much of the news cycles are focused on COVID. So we're going to have to see sort of what's happening there. A few thoughts on how this plays out in the security space. For some folks that drop security or IT staff, and for some of those that don't come back, and some of these organizations that have stopped, the VCs have stopped funding, does this mean that we're going to have a lot of great talent that we can recruit and bring on the market? Maybe. I would argue that if you're a company that is thinking about reduction of staff, it's best not to if you can, because getting folks and then onboarding them back on and having them understand what's going on, it's going to put you behind. So we definitely don't want to be there. Another thing that we saw, 2006, insurance companies started out offering outbreak insurance. It had sort of a mixed reaction with the market. We maybe see some of those things coming on again, but it's right now it's really hard for us to see where we are going and how long this lasts. And I think in many cases this makes it very tough for organizations to figure out how to move this thing forward. Something you can do personally. For some of those that know me, I used to search for aliens using SETI with my computing resources. Folding at Home has a project, and there's actually an old school hacking group that is folding and running simulations for COVID-19. I've joined. If you get a chance and you have some CPU cycles that you can donate to help the calls, join the team. We're trying to get a bunch of security people in there that would be helpful. Yes, I'm sure the folding client's probably not the greatest in security, but at the same time, it's probably not so horrible from attack vector that you can use that and help out. So we're coming to the end now. Hopefully this coronavirus stuff will start to ease up on us, and this made me laugh, right? Fear of the corona is on the decline. Release the murder hornets. So 2020 is just a strange year, and there's a lot of crazy things that are going on, and I think we need to be very mindful of the stress and the burden and everything that's going on with folks in our industry, with outside of our industry. Try to keep ourselves focused on some of the positive things. I know that can be really hard to see. If you do have time on your hands where you weren't expecting it, use this time to better yourself. Try to stay positive, and focus on a new skill, or if you're finding time increasing and improving things that you have in place now. Definitely some odd times. Hopefully this helped to share some thoughts of what we're seeing, what we've seen in the past with some of our research, and how to think about this moving forward. Hopefully maybe you grabbed a few concepts here that you can talk with your team and or your management. And at this point, Eric, I think we do have a little time for questions, as long as the questions aren't like, hey, did this virus originate from a Chinese laboratory? I'll try to take some of them or pass them to you, Eric. But I really appreciate everyone listening today. And if there's any questions, I'll let Eric sort of moderate for us.
Hey, thanks, Jake. So I'll give folks just a couple seconds to add their questions to the chat window, if anyone has any. But one thing I would like to ask myself, Jake, so if I'm an organization out there and I'm concerned about the thing that I should do that's going to be most impactful to protect my business, what advice would you give to me?
Yeah, I I really wish there was a single answer for this. I really do. But there just isn't one. You know, the what should I do does come down to, it depends on your situation and your business. But I try to tell people we definitely want to go back to the basics, right? We don't need to get super advanced or crazy here. Two-factor authentication is so important, right? Yes, I know there's ways that it can be broken. Yes, I get it. But for the most part, TFA and two-factor authentication is huge. You know, I'm going to say, understand your vulnerabilities and prioritize your risks, those sorts of things. Managing your vendors, I think, is a big one. But again, just some of the things that sometimes we take for granted about awareness and spending time with our folks to tell them, please don't click those links, you know, and as much as you want to, and much as it feels like you should do it, you know, don't do that sort of stuff. So I think it's trying to go back to those basics, reinforce the things that everyone already knows, just because there's so much going on and there's so much stress right now that I think people are overlooking some of the things that they know better, and we don't want to have that happen.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. What about for the RVA security community? Any specific things you would say to them?
Yeah, you know, I think, look, I want everyone to stay safe. You know, it's really hard to understand, you know, and it's horrible when you can't see friends and can't see family and those sorts of things, but I want us to be smart and stay safe. I don't think there's enough clear data out there about what the heck's going on with this thing to sort of make sense about who's at risk and who isn't. So, but it's tough, right? And being isolated for some folks is easier than others, you know, some of the jokes we made, but try to stay positive during this time. I recently read an article that was sort of arguing that there could be 75,000 deaths due to suicide and depression and alcohol and abuse and all these sorts of other things that happen because of the economy and whatnot. And so I think we have to stay positive. You have to use this time to invest into yourself, right? If you've been impacted, unfortunately, and you don't come out of this event with a new skill or something like that, that's bad, right? Try to stay positive. Don't be lazy. Try to do something. Now, stressful time. If you need help, you want to talk to someone, I'm here. There's lots of other people that are here. Reach out. For the security community, many of you knew that last week was supposed to be RVATECH, our big get-together, and that didn't happen, which was a bummer. We've rescheduled for October. If the world's not back together by October, then I don't know what the next webinar is going to be like when we talk about this. But hopefully we're back together. We may have to adjust when we get back together, you know, for the huggers out there. Maybe people don't want to get hugged, you know, so there's going to be a lot of things that's going to take the community to get back together. I miss seeing everyone, miss talking to everyone. But if someone's struggling, please reach out. There's a lot of people in the Richmond community that care, that will help you the best that it can, whether it's listening or advice or whatever it may be.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again, Jake. Oops, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Jake. So I'm just a small business by myself, but I am noticing, tell me about phishing. I am getting a lot of, you know, besides the ones about selling masks and things like that, I'm getting emails about upgrading passwords from Microsoft and different things. And I'm always constantly looking. With the PPP loan, when I was going through that process, I was scared to open up anything from Wells Fargo that asked me for password. But are there any main phishing attacks you're seeing, or things that we should really be aware of?
Yeah, you know, there's quite a bit going on, and there's even some security groups around the world that are sort of collaborating, trying to identify to find what they are and what's going on, and even trying to shut some of them down. The reality is that I've stopped giving sort of tips on how to identify phishing versus not phishing, right? You know, sort of it used to be, well, you know, open up the source and then look in here or hover over here and try to figure out. I've gotten to the point where it's just like, just don't click anything, right? There's really no reason for you to click anything. Now, again, I say that, and you may have a business model where there is a real reason. So, you know, apply it accordingly. But whether you're going through dealing with your bank or whatever it may be, come in an email, if there's any sort of threat or any sort of, you need to do this and or else, or any of those sort of gambits, right? It's a sign that something potentially is wrong. But if you're going through a process, like, you know, we started to see even at the end of last year before the pandemic, folks that were going through the loan process or the refinancing process, right? The attackers would watch, and then right at the process where you the point where you were expecting to do something like that check or that settlement, they were getting in there and it seemed natural, right? But it boils down for me is that this isn't going to stop. It's going to get worse, whether it's COVID or something else. Just stop clicking links. If you see something, then call, which I know is painful, or go to the website directly and go in the process in that fashion. I don't have any real advice other than to give you, like, try for these things and then things will be good. We're seeing attackers on both sides that are getting really, really crafty, that it's almost impossible to tell it apart. And then we're seeing the other side that are making things so bad on purpose, because those are the people that, like, if you're going to click on that link that's in the worst English you've ever seen and it's got every flaw possible and you click on that, those are the kind of folks that, you know, they're the mark, because you won't be able to get their money back, right? So I've just been advising at this level to stop clicking stuff, please, and know that there's going to be more and more of this coming. So Laura, I know that's not the greatest advice, but the reality is that we're just seeing a spike in this stuff, and it's getting worse.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for your insights today. They were great.
Cool. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too boring. I hope it offered some guidance. And again, myself and Eric, please reach out to us. I know that we're slammed right now. It's sort of in our world, I guess it's a good thing, and we're blessed for that. But at the same time, feels like we're busier than ever. But if we can help, please let us know, even if it's just a quick talk. We're not trying to sell you anything. We're happy to help you. You know, we care about the Richmond community. We want everyone to come out of this as best as possible. So please reach out if we can help at all. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.